dead wrong.
The Iraqi response was anything but penitent. Iraq's charge d'affaires in Washington, summoned to hear the third straight U.S. warning in 3 straight days, complained the real war crimes are the deaths among Iraqi civilians.
These civilian sites and people in Iraq were being damaged and killed as if the people in Iraq are coming from the outer space.
Specifically now, the United States can and will press the International Red Cross to demand more inspections and an accounting of all of those prisoners. But the truth is that now, given that the United States is already waging a war against Iraq, there's very little specifically that the United States can actually do. Dan?
Thanks, Wyatt. For all the advances in military hardware, they haven't figured out how to fight a war without warriors. Until they do, warriors will be captured and Americans will feel the pain and the worry, as Bob Fall found.
Across the country, Americans could only look on in horror. American boys not only captured and paraded, but also abused, their bodies used as human shields, their stilted, unnatural voices used as crude propaganda.
We were flying, and all of a sudden, a left bang out the left wing.
Warrant Officer Guy Hunter doesn't believe a word of it, said his distraught wife, Mary.
I would tell him that I loved him very, very much. And that my heart is breaking for him.
The not knowing is the worst part.
Hunter's sister talked of her brother's toughness of someone who survives anything. Others, like the mother of downed pilot Tom Costin, could only hope as much.
He just wants to do his duty, and he wants to be back there. I'm sure he's going to get back into that cockpit and fly again. But I know he's going to walk off those sands.
And was shot down by a surface-to-air missile.
To hear the voice of a dead man talking, the monotone. To hear the grammar, which tells me that they didn't even write those statements. Those were written by the Iraqis.
Ron Bliss should know, the one-time resident of the notorious Hanoi Hilton. He was prisoner of war in Vietnam for 6.5 years.
The Iraqis are not even subtle enough to confine the brutality to non-visible places. They've obviously beat them about the head and shoulders. And for us to even question why they gave those statements is intolerable, I think.
But those who have monitored Iraqi behavior over the last 8 years shudder when they describe how Saddam has treated other prisoners.
They've been interrogated, often using electrical shocks and other forms of torture in order to be able to extract information, or else to be able to punish, to be able to sometimes show an example, to persuade people to cooperate with the Iraqi authorities.
The experts also agree that what might work to bolster Iraqi morale at home will earn Saddam condemnation anywhere else.
And I think it really has quite the opposite effect worldwide from what the Iraqis want, because it makes people realize that these men are not making big betrayal statements at all.
Realize, said one expert, these people are trying to resist the best way they can. Realize, too, he went on, we're probably going to see more of it.
Our leaders and our people have wrongly attacked the peaceful people of Iraq.
Bob Fall, CBS News, New York.
In addition to the pilots, downed and otherwise, there are other American heroes in the Gulf, including a high-tech missile, bringing Saddam's Scuds down to earth, and why low-tech bombers getting the call to action. All of that as our special report continues. It's hard to tell. British military sources today offered a more somber assessment than the U.S. Defense Department. The British officers saying that much of Iraq's war machine does remain intact. Our Pentagon correspondent David Martin is at his post. David, what are we to make of these not conflicting views, but different views?
Well, you know, Dan, ever since Operation Desert Storm began, Defense Department officials have really gone out of their way to dampen expectations that this would be a quick and easy war, and now I think we see why. 3 days of bad weather have slowed down the air campaign, and the sheer magnitude of the task of dismantling Saddam's military, I think, is beginning to sink in. American high-tech weapons are putting on spectacular demonstrations of precision bombing. Here, 4 laser-guided bombs score a direct hit on what appears to be a hydroelectric power plant.
And here, a missile so new it is not even officially part of the American arsenal zeroes in on one of Saddam's nuclear production facilities, sending television pictures back to a pilot who guides it home. But those are just 2 targets among hundreds that have to be struck. Not all of them are as vulnerable to attack, and many of them, like this airfield, have to be hit over and over again.
We know where the bunkers are. We think there are airplanes in them. Of course, we can't see inside them. We have the capability to take them out, but you got to remember with an air crash shelter, I think that's what we call them, it's 1 bomb per, and it just takes some time to do that.
Dan, Saddam's strategy is clearly to hunker down and hope the coalition exhausts either its weapons or its political will before it can destroy its military. Pentagon officials here say he's miscalculated again, that they can keep this up much longer than he thinks they can. But that also means this is going to be perhaps a bloodier and costlier war than they had hoped for.
David Martin of the Pentagon, thanks. With the prospect now of a possible costly ground war looming, the old-timers in the Air Force, the B-52s, have been dispatched to weaken Iraq's ability to fight a ground war. Richard Schlesinger is here with a report. Richard?
Dan, in military language, it's called strategic bombing. In plain language, the B-52s are targeting Iraq's elite troops and Scud missile sites with carpet bombing.
Our B-52s are being used to meet our campaign objectives, and they have been participating from D-Day.
This is what it's like, and there is nothing Iraqi troops can do about it but wait for it to be over. Pulitzer Prize-winning author Neil Sheehan covered carpet bombing in Vietnam.
These planes become great flying trucks loaded with bombs. And when you have 20 tons of bombs coming down from each plane within a fixed area, you're going to destroy almost everything within the area. It's this horrendous eruption of boom, 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 these bombs going off in sequence, just smashing everything within that area.
And when they're done, what does the area look like?
It looks like the moonscape.
Former Air Force Chief of Staff Michael Dugan says the idea is to pick a box-shaped area, sometimes as small as a football field.
One has a bomb box, and this is a box that's the size, approximately the scale of this map.
What do you call that?
A bomb box.
So what will happen inside these bomb boxes?
There'd be 50 bombs in each of those, and they'd be spaced at 30, 40, 50 feet apart. What would happen is devastation.
At the planning center, it's a map, it's all very sanitary. Down below, of course, it's human beings, hundreds of them, who are being blown to pieces, tanks tossed in the air, people are going crazy, because that kind of bombardment is the worst kind of bombardment. It's far worse than artillery bombardment.
Well, this is a good way of demoralizing troops.
Israeli analyst Amatzia Bar-Am is an authority on the Iraqi troops reportedly under B-52 bombardment.
They are sitting ducks. They are not doing anything. They are perfectly passive. And from my own experience as a field commander, I can tell you, there is nothing as aggravating as being a sitting duck.
But
so
if
that's
you're
one...
dug in hardened bunkers, you can survive bombing from B-52s, can't you?
I am not so sure that they are dug in hardened bunkers. I think that they are dug in a more primitive way, and that they do suffer.
In some cases, they put delay fuses on the bombs. This means that the bomb doesn't go off as soon as it hits the ground. It goes into the ground, and then it explodes when it's 50 feet or so into the ground, so the subterranean shock collapses the bunkers. So you get a tremendous destructive effect. It's the closest thing to hell.
And as of tonight, right now, there are no official estimates of the damage caused by carpet bombing. Dan?
Thanks, Richard. One bit of good news from the Mideast, there are others, but one bit of good news is that no new Scud attacks against Israel in nearly 2 days. One reason for that may be the U.S. manned Patriot missiles now on station there. For the latest, our chief European correspondent Tom Fenton in Tel Aviv.
Israel marveled at how quickly U.S. troops set up their anti-missile defense around Tel Aviv. These soldiers arrived only this morning. No one knows how long they will stay.
Until we bust all Saddam's missiles, I guess.
People from nearby communities streamed across the fields to see their new defenders and express their appreciation.
I want to feel more security. Wonderful feel to see it.
America's Special Envoy, Deputy Secretary of State Eagleberger, is the hero of the hour. He was cheered by residents of a poor neighborhood that was hit by one of the Iraqi Scuds. Eagleburger is here to massage Israeli fears and keep them out of the war.
We admire Israeli restraint and certainly recognize how difficult it has been for the government of Israel to follow that policy, and we respect it.
600 Israelis have been made homeless by the Iraqi missile attack. The Army warns that more attacks could come at any time and fears Iraq may well resort to poison gas.
45 years after Auschwitz, to have 4 million Jews have to wear gas masks. Should I know it, this is something which is an outrage.
The Army has just announced tonight that all Israelis can go back to work tomorrow, but it has ordered them to carry their gas masks and all schools must remain closed. It may be months before all the Iraqi missile launchers can be destroyed, and so Israelis will have to learn to live with the constant threat of sudden attack. Dan?
Thanks, Tom. The Patriot missiles have knocked 9 Iraqi Scuds out of the air that we know about. Good work by a weapon that had not been fired in anger ever. Edie Magnus is here with more. Edie?
Dan, the Raytheon Company stock closed up 5 points today, and it's no surprise. Its Patriot missile system is getting some great publicity and has now become the pride and joy of the defense establishment. The Gulf War marks the first time ever that anti-ballistic missiles have been used in combat, and the successful debut of the Patriot missile system, often shown live on television, is reaping a war dividend of unexpected proportions.
Television has really helped to bring home to the American people the advantages of having such a system when our Patriot shot down the Scud and all of America saw it on TV.
Here's how it works. When Iraq fires a Scud missile, the Patriot's ground radar system detects it and, when sure of the threat, sends an electrical message to the missile launcher to fire. While the Patriot missile is airborne, radar sensors inside the weapon and on the ground exchange data on the exact location of the Scud until the missile finds it and strikes. It all happens in seconds. The Patriot is traveling around 2,000 miles an hour, and the Scud nearly 3,000 miles an hour.
Human beings could absolutely not hit an incoming Scud with any handheld weapons or other weapons that we have in the inventory right now.
Ironically, the Patriot was nearly axed on the drawing board amid skepticism over the concept of computerized weaponry.
The specification was very ambitious, and the software involved was particularly difficult, and there were cost overruns.
It took 25 years to develop. Each Patriot missile cost more than $500,000. Then in the mid-'80s, the Patriot's software was modified to intercept not just enemy aircraft, but missiles.
I think probably that finding this anti-ballistic missile role saved its day.
It all looks good, unless Iraq increases the volume of Scuds launched at Allied targets.
As the numbers increase, the probability of striking all of them goes down.
Are the Iraqis capable of that?
I don't believe they are.
There are reports that one Patriot missile fired yesterday from Riyadh malfunctioned and crashed. A huge crater was found with remnants of a missile. The military says it's investigating. Dan?
Edie Magnus, thanks. When we come back, the impact of war against Iraq on Americans who used to call Iraq home and have family who still do. Worrisome to all Americans, but it carries a special sadness for some minority groups in this country, among them Americans of Arab descent, including those with roots and relatives still in Iraq. Jerry Bowen has their story.
As deeply felt and fervent as any prayer in the mosques of America is the sense of anguish tonight in this country's Arab community, especially among Iraqi Americans who have family trapped in the war zone. Iraqi Americans who hate Saddam Hussein, love their relatives, and find themselves at odds over a war many feel they can only lose.
I have no choice but save Obama, knowing that I might lose my mom. I believe in it. I believe in freedom. I believe in liberating Iraqi people.
Does it mean you have to declare a war on a whole nation and subjugate 17 million people to death because you don't like one person?
Anguish personified by Jamil Abdul Razak of Seattle, peace activist. His extended family in Iraq numbers 56. And Dalal of Minneapolis. Her mother lives in Baghdad. Her brother is in the Iraqi army. She doesn't want her last name revealed because she fears retaliation.
We need to get this dictator out. This dictator has been killing and executing people for a long time, for the last decade.
I don't hate anybody. There's a sense of resignation that somehow from this madness, something good may come out of it, at a great sacrifice of innocent people.
What do we want? Peace! When do we want it?
They are divided, too, on the wisdom of America's anti-war movement.
I get very angry and frustrated as an American citizen, something I'm very proud of, when I see the people rallying against the president of this country.
And I hope sanity will prevail, because war never solves a problem and never going to solve this problem. You may win the war but lose the peace.
And what of Saddam Hussein?
You don't go kill the innocent because you cannot catch the criminal.
The man is a maniac, and the day I see him gone will be the second happiest day of my life. First day of my life the happiest day of my life was when I arrived to New York City 10 years ago.
And in Iraq, it has been another day of war. For Iraqi Americans, one more day of anguish and prayer. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Joining us now for added perspective on the war and peace politics of the Middle East, our CBS News consultant and friend Fuad Ajami. Professor Ajami, is Saddam Hussein already looking like a winner in his own neighborhood for having survived this long?
Well, I think this has always been his bet, Dan, that we would deliver him the first blow, he would survive the first blow, he would then turn to his neighborhood, he would turn to the Arab people, he would say to them, look, you know, it was never expected that I would win against the Americans, but we are here, we've survived the American assault, and that all along the hope has always been that you would turn a military confrontation into a political one, and hope that in somehow that this military defeat will be judged some kind of favorable political outcome in your neighborhood, in your world, and that you will be sanctioned in your world.
What about Saddam and the POWs? Were you surprised?
Well, no, I'm not surprised. I mean, Saddam, you can't read to Saddam the Geneva Conventions on war prisoners. I mean, Saddam has been a criminal for a long time. This is very typical of him. But see, I think this is really what this whole display of the POWs has done. Operation Desert Storm was billed as an attempt to liberate Kuwait. But what this has really now done, what this has turned the war into, if we had ever any doubts about this, this is now a war over the Iraqi regime itself. And I think for President Bush, what's now so clear is that not only do we have to liberate Kuwait, but you must go after the man himself. You must go after Saddam Hussein. You must destroy this regime in Baghdad, because in effect, the break with the codes of international order on the part of Saddam Hussein is nearly total.
Interesting point. I want to make sure I understand. You think that given this, that Saddam now can't just get out of Kuwait and be okay?
Well, I think there is a great debate within this coalition. I mean, there is a maximum view, and I think that's actually the American position and maybe even the Saudi position, that it's too far now for Saddam. You can't have Saddam around. You can't have a peace in the Persian Gulf with Saddam still in power in Baghdad. There is a more moderate view, if you will, a more accommodationist view toward Saddam. That's the French view. People who basically say, look, Saddam is a menace, Saddam is a danger, Saddam is a problem only because he came into Kuwait on August 2nd. And if we beat him on Kuwait, then the matter comes to an end. I think now, we are now moving toward the more maximal view. And the maximal view is you can't really have peace in the Persian Gulf. You can't have order in the Persian Gulf with Saddam Hussein in power in Baghdad.
There's only a few seconds left. Where do you think it goes from here?
Sorry?
Where does it go from here?
Well, I think we basically now, you know, the hope, the early euphoria that we could knock Saddam out early has been dissipated. And we must be ready for a long haul. We must be ready possibly for a war on the ground.
Fuad Ajami, Johns Hopkins University, thanks. So far, it's been largely an air war against Iraq. Early hopes that it would stay an air war are fading, and preparations are underway for what could likely come next, a difficult and possibly bloody and costly ground assault to push Saddam Hussein's best troops, at least push them out of Kuwait. Martha Teichner filed this report from the northeast of Saudi Arabia, where the Allied move on the ground would start.
This is what it will look like when the ground war begins. Waves of armored vehicles spread out across the desert, advancing relentlessly toward the Iraqi defenses. The Desert Wedge, it's called, configured to maximize the open space in order to minimize losses in case of attack. Here at the assembly areas for U.S. armor, before the battle orders come, there is a chance to practice maneuvers the terrain makes impossible back home in the United States, or at bases in Germany. The speculation here is that the ground war will only begin when Iraq's best force, the Republican Guard, has been neutralized by airstrikes, and then the advance through Kuwait may be straightforward, even quick.
Hey.
Critical to the advance will be the self-propelled howitzer, called the King of Battle. It takes no more than 6 minutes to set it up, ready to fire, park, and shoot. Its job is to pave the way for the tanks.
Before the tanks get up to the battle area, we will soften the targets up. We will hammer them hard with our artillery, hopefully knocking out a bunch of their early tanks so these guys can go up farther and engage it deeper into the battle.
Its range is nearly 10 miles. The self-propelled howitzer can hit the Iraqis at that distance, but its crews don't think the Iraqis have long enough range artillery to reach them, an advantage they believe could mean survival. Martha Teichner with the Army's 7th Corps in northeast Saudi Arabia.
What's it like to be a prisoner of war in the hands of the Iraqis? 60 Minutes correspondent Mike Wallace talks to some men who found out the hard way. When we come back.
Showdown in the Gulf continues. Here again is Dan Rather.
Updating events in the Middle East, a jarring night for Saudis. The body of an Iraqi Scud missile without the warhead fell to the ground on a street in the capital city of Riyadh. It's unclear whether it was shot down or broke apart. In any case, no injuries are reported. One U.S. jet was shot down earlier, bringing to 9 the total number of American fighters shot down, according to the Pentagon. But by far the major attention of the day has been the treatment of U.S. prisoners by Iraq. President Bush is angered by threats that they would be used as human shields. How do Iraqis deal with prisoners? How have they in the past? You had only a taste of the treatment today. 60 Minutes correspondent Mike Wallace found it can go from bad to worse. Mike?
Dan, the question everybody here is asking tonight is this. How will a man like Saddam Hussein, a man capable of using chemical weapons against his own people, how will such a man treat our people, the American and allied prisoners of war, whose lives are now in his hands?
One answer to that question can be found here in the Iranian hospitals, where POWs from the Iran-Iraq War are still fighting to recover from years they spent in Iraqi prison camps. Before the war started, I traveled to Tehran, where I discovered how Iranian POWs had fared under Saddam. The stories they told were frightening, stories of torture and brutality.
What did you do to your leg, and when did you do it?
I've been wounded in war. I had a bullet on my leg, and in Iraq they didn't do any operation on me. They beaten me and they tortured us instead of doing the operation on my wounded leg.
How old were you when you joined the army?
16 years old.
16 years old, in the Revolutionary Guards.
For 1 year I couldn't walk.
This man was in an Iraqi prison camp for 8 years, almost the entire length of the war. He is partially paralyzed as a result of torture sessions in which some sort of electric shock was used.
They tortured him with cup, kind of wire, and so he lost the power in his hand. For 1 complete month, they would torture me, and I would pass away, and then they would pour water on me, and then they would do that again.
I asked each of the men we spoke with how he feels about Saddam Hussein now, and I received the same remarkable answer from all of them. Saddam, they claim, was just a tool of a U.S. government bent on destroying all of Islam, all in the cause of money and imperialism.
America is the main enemy?
Is the number 1 enemy of us and all the other Muslim people around the world.
Iraq wounded you. Iraq, Saddam Hussein. We are fighting. The United States is fighting Saddam Hussein and Iraq. And yet you hate the United States worse than you hate Iraq.
As Imam said, the main enemy is America. The others, they're all puppets. Saddam, Israel, French, and the other. They are the main enemy. The boss of all of them is America.
And the anti-Americanism these men displayed is a fact of life in much of the Middle East, Dan, not just in Iran and Iraq, as you know, but in Jordan, Algeria, surely among all the Palestinians. But Dan, if Iraq ignored the Geneva Conventions in handling those Iranian prisoners, you're bound to wonder how they're going to treat American POWs.
You wonder, but it's obviously one reason that President Bush came back so hard today talking about war crimes. It's a warning, isn't it? You better not treat our prisoners as you did the Iranians, or you'll pay the price. Chance that would work?
To this moment, he hasn't done much to put fear into Saddam Hussein, has he?
Mike Wallace, thanks. Vietnam was a different time, a different enemy, but U.S. prisoners of war got rough treatment there, very rough. One who lived through being a captive during that war is now a U.S. Senator, John McCain. Republican from Arizona. Senator McCain joins us live from Phoenix. Thanks for being with us, Senator.
Thanks, Dan.
What's going through the minds of those pilots tonight?
I think there's enormous fear, enormous apprehension, at the same time a lot of patriotism. They are been schooled and trained to anticipate this when they're shot down, and I believe they have behaved in an admirable fashion, and I think that all of us can be proud of the way they behaved, because they clearly displayed, Dan, that they were under severe mental and physical duress in order to make those statements, and nobody believes them, and I think America is outraged.
What can we do, all of us, what can we do to help their families?
I think we can tell their families that we have confidence in their sons and their husbands and their brothers, and that we will pray for them, and that we will do everything we can to get this war over as quickly as possible and bring them home in a few weeks.
Do you think there's a chance for a quick end to the war, Senator?
Yes, I do, Dan. I think in a few weeks we can bring it to an end, and I think the next few days will be very critical as the weather clears. Let me say one other thing, if I could, about these men. There's been a lot of questions about the code of conduct. Code of conduct says name, rank, serial number, date of birth, but it also says I will resist to the best of my ability. And I'm convinced these men are resisting to the best of their ability.
And because of the experiences in Vietnam, the code of conduct was adjusted somewhat to allow you to do what you feel you have to do.
And I think they were doing what they had to do. I think clearly the way they articulated, the statements they made about peaceful Iraq and all that, it didn't help Saddam Hussein at all with world opinion. It may have helped him with his own people, obviously, but it didn't fool anyone.
I know it's hard to tell from the film, Senator, but you've seen these men. Your opinion, have they been beaten, or are these wounds from ejection at high speed?
It's my view that they have been beaten and both physically and mentally mistreated. I just want to say a follow-up to what Mike Wallace had to say. Saddam Hussein has clearly decided to use these people for propaganda purposes. So the good news is he will want to keep them alive in order to be able to manipulate public opinion and put pressure on us. And I think their families can take some pressure and pleasure in that and comfort in that.
Senator, how do you hang on as a POW? You hung on for a very long time under extremely rugged conditions.
I think you find comfort in faith. I think you have faith in your country, that your country is doing everything to bring you home. Faith in your fellow prisoners, that they're trying just as hard as you are, and faith in God.
Senator, it's a tough call for journalists. There are a lot of them anytime you cover a war. Play these films, including the sound, or keep them off television?
Dan, I know that's a great debate that's going on right now, and opinion seems to be evenly divided. If I had to come down in this case because of the behavior of these men and their appearance, perhaps it's best that the American people and the people of the world saw, again, what kind of a person Saddam Hussein is, and hopefully the American people will be angry, rally behind this effort, and we bring this conflict to a rapid conclusion.
Senator John McCain, Arizona, thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Dan.
Results are in this evening from the latest CBS News New York Times poll taken yesterday. Only 18% now expect the war to last just a few weeks. Even so, 3 out of 4 in our new poll say the U.S. was right to start military action against Iraq. We'll be back in a moment with more of our Showdown in the Gulf, so stay here with us.
Area caused a big crater, and the ground absorbed so much of the blast. Other developments of the day, Saddam Hussein has set fire to some oil facilities in Kuwait, causing giant smoke there. For what reason he set them afire, we don't yet know. Scud missiles were fired at the Dhahran base today. No hits there reported. The Patriot missiles were fired in defense of Tel Aviv today. We saw 2 Patriot missiles go up. Whether they hit any Scuds or not, we do not know, but 1 Scud definitely hit. Also, the Soviet experts today said that 90% of Allied missions in Iraq and Kuwait are missing their targets. That's the Soviets' view. This is one reason that we want to have this briefing this afternoon. We're going to carry it with General Kelly. The Soviets saying as many as 90% of the airstrikes not hitting their targets. And the early analysis, General George Christ, who's here helping us analyze, is that...
a couple of brief announcements here.
Let's go to Pete Williams'
today,
Defense Department more later from here.
Will be Lieutenant General Tom Kelly, who's been with us the past several days, the Director of Operations for the Joint Staff, and Dave Harrington, H-E-R-R-I-N-G-T-O-N, who's the Director for Current Intelligence for the building, for the Defense Department. Admiral McConnell, who ordinarily briefs us today, is on another assignment, so he can't be with us today. Tomorrow at this time, at the same time here in the Pentagon, Secretary Cheney and General Powell will be here to give you an update on the operation, answer your questions on how things are going, and we'll do our very best to assemble what we've had over the last several days, show it to you as graphically as we can, under the limitations that we have to work under for sources and methods, sources of information and methods of gathering that information, but they will be here to answer your questions tomorrow. Captain Harrington will start today with a little description to tell you how bomb damage assessment is done, and then I'll be back after that with a few other announcements. So let me turn it over to General Kelly and Captain Harrington.
Good afternoon. We are 6 days into the campaign. Significant activity during the last 24 hours includes air operations at an intense pace against the highest priority targets, to include Scuds, Iraq's command and control, Iraq's forces in Kuwait, and Iraq, with emphasis on the Republican Guards to include their logistics. We have over 474,000 Americans in the theater. We are above 10,000 air sorties. As you know, 6 Scuds were launched into Saudi Arabia yesterday, 2 at Riyadh and 4 in the eastern province. The one at Riyadh was destroyed by a Patriot. 1 landed in an uninhabited area. In the eastern province, 1 was destroyed by a Patriot. 2 landed in uninhabited areas. 1 landed in the water. We have lost a total of 9 aircraft, and that's the same figure as yesterday. During the past 24 hours, Baghdad has been struck. The weather over the Kuwaiti theater of operations has been bad, and that has inhibited some airstrikes going into that area. Western Iraq, of course, is a priority, as I said. Iraqi sorties were low. On the mines that we have encountered, 19 confirmed, all 19 were destroyed. Missing in action, 14. On the subject of the weather, it has improved somewhat. I took a look at a weather map this morning. Iraq looks pretty clear, which bodes well for today, both in terms of strikes and in terms of bomb damage assessment, BDA, and it was very cloudy over Kuwait. I'm going to ask Dave to talk for just a minute about what bomb damage assessment consists of, so that hopefully you'll have a better understanding of why it's a little bit difficult to get, and it's not simply a pilot's report of what he saw when he or she released their weapons. Dave?
Thanks, sir. I think the key operative thing to remember when we talk about bomb damage assessment is that it's a process. It's a very intense process, it's time-consuming, it's manpower-intensive, and it takes a lot of time. For example, when you look at combat camera footage, that in itself does not represent BDA. That's a piece of information, like other pieces of information, that we have to do 2 things with. The first thing is we have to verify, take a look at the damage that was done, assess that.
This part of the briefing has to do with the ongoing argument about just how much damage actually has been done and what, in fact, has been going on. An argument is developing, particularly with the Soviets saying that 90% of the strikes have not been hitting their targets. So that's what this part of the briefing centers on.
Start to make an assessment. We're in that process now of trying to collect this information, get our people to look at it, and come up with some assessments. The reason we do this, and the reason we have the process, is so that we can provide the military commanders with a sense of how well his operation is going. And you can't do that with just looking at a single bomb crater or a single building with a roof going off. It's much, much more involved than that. It's a very complicated process.
For example, when a pilot releases a weapon, this question was asked this morning, why doesn't he come back and say what the weapon did? Well, to a degree he does, but it takes a trained photo interpreter, if you get a photo of it, to tell exactly what the effect of it was. And by the way, once the pilot launches his weapon to the point where he's authorized to release it, if it's a TV-guided weapon, it's all the way into the target. If it's something else, it's not. He's busy getting out of there because they're flying into fairly intense air defense environments. Questions?
General, can you tell us about the oil field fires, how they were started, and what the effect has been on your operations?
The indication we have from the theater is that they were started by Iraqi action. They're looking into that now. It has had, to the best of my knowledge, no effect on U.S. military operations.
Follow up, sir. What kind of Iraqi action? Artillery, mining?
They're looking into it. I'll have to find out, and as soon as I do, I'll let you know. I don't know right now.
Getting back to the bomb damage assessment, you say it takes a while to figure out exactly how effective you've been, but yet you've said to us that you're 80% effective. Can you explain that?
Let me try to explain that. We said, and I want to try and get out of the numbers game a little bit, but we said 80% of the sorties were successful. We're having an 80% success rate. That means the airplane takes off, goes to his target, and the pilot either drops his bomb or launches his missile or does whatever it is he's supposed to do. That's one part of the process. The target has been attacked. In some cases, he'll be able to know if he hit the target. In other cases, he won't if he's dropping through clouds or something like that. The second part of the process, which is the bomb damage assessment, which was just addressed, is an analysis of what happened to that target after it was struck. Ideally, we would like to have aerial photographs of it so that trained people can sit down and actually tell what happened inside the building.
If I could follow, please. Can you tell me a little bit about how much problem you've had with decoys? Has your assessment given you an indication of how many decoys you've had, and you may have thought you had targets, but it turned out not to be targets?
Mentioned, I think, yesterday that there were some decoys there. We don't think that is not an insurmountable problem. We are able to work through it. It's possible that some targets that have been attacked are decoys. I don't know for a fact whether that's true or not, but I don't think it's having any kind of major impact or even substantial impact on operations. Yes,
General
sir.
Kelly, each day you talked about taking out command and control targets. And there are reports that Saddam Hussein has a very integral network of tunnels that he's going between the defense ministry and underneath the presidential headquarters. Can you talk about what do you mean when you say taking out command and control? Has that process moved ahead?
We think that we have done a great deal of damage to his command and control system. I think the Admiral said yesterday, Admiral McConnell, that he may still be exercising control. Let me just tell you that linear targets are always difficult. Communications is a linear target. Things like runways, railroads, pipelines, you can take a section of them out and they can be repaired. We know there are cases where we have bombed runways, they have repaired the runways and been back up operating within 24 hours. We can take out a microwave tower and cut a link. There are workarounds to that may not be as good as what he had when he started, but he can still get some information out. So I can't tell you right now with precision exactly what his command and control capability is. I can tell you that it's been degraded.
General, could you give us a rough idea of how many Patriot missiles you're firing to bring down each Scud missile?
No, we're not discussing the number of Patriot missiles expended. We don't have any great concerns in that line, but we just don't discuss that.
I'll go back to the bomb damage assessment. Can you give us some description, even if it's preliminary, of some of the assessments you've made to this point, particularly as it regards the Republican Guard?
Republican Guards are one that might be fairly difficult because, as you know, for the past several days, there's been heavy cloud cover over southern Iraq and northern Kuwait, which is exactly the area that the Republican Guards has occupied. That's not to say they haven't been attacked, because they have. But now, as the weather clears, we'll be out tactically trying to take the pictures of those units to determine exactly what the impact has been.
So you have no idea at this point?
We feel that there's been damage. I can't quantify it. Incidentally, there are some types of BDA, bomb damage assessment, that we would like to be circumspect with, that have to do with sophisticated capabilities, and we don't want the Iraqis to know that we know what the status is. Yes,
General,
sir.
concerning the television pictures coming out of Iraq with POWs, is there going to be any attempt made to try to isolate those particular broadcast stations and take them out, if not for any other reason, for increasing American morale by not showing these people being possibly coerced or abused? Is that a priority?
We are trying to do that. We have been significantly successful. There is not much television going on. How he's getting them out of the country in terms of the exact specifics, I can't tell you, but you can easily smuggle a tape out of Baghdad to some other place and get it out of the country that way. Then it gets shown around the world. I don't think there's many people watching television in Baghdad.
Follow up, if you would, on that. Is there a possibility that you have small, low-power television stations broadcasting near the borders where such transmissions can be picked up by Jordan, by Turkey, by Israel, and that, in essence, is how it's getting out? If so, would harm missiles or whatever be used to take those out?
It's possible that that's happening, of course. But depending on how low the power output is, would have an impact on what kind of weapons you could use against it. We are very interested in his capability to televise things like that. We are also very interested in a number of other extremely important things that we're going after. We're doing the best we can. We have enjoyed some success. We think we'll enjoy success in the future.
General, yes, General, what about this latest Scud attack on Israel? Apparently one Scud did get through to Tel Aviv despite the arrival of the Patriots. Do you have any preliminary assessment on that?
That happened within the last couple of hours, and the Israelis are working very hard at it right now. And my suggestion would be, at this stage of the game, you would have to go ask them what the specifics are, because we don't know. We're trying to get some information out of them.
If I can just follow on that, Israel has these additional Patriots we sent. The fact that at least one Scud successfully got in, what does that say now about the limitations of the Patriots?
Don't know, because I'd have to know what the facts were that existed at the time the Scud got in. I simply don't know that. If it got in and landed, then it's obvious that the Patriot didn't get it, and that'll have to be analyzed, and we'll have to try to figure out why that occurred.
Is there an analysis going on?
Describe as best you can what you think Saddam Hussein's strategy is here. Earlier you said his armed forces don't seem to be putting up much of a fight. There are a lot of people who will say that's exactly the point. He's sitting there and taking it, waiting for the U.S. and its allies to exhaust themselves. What do you think his strategy is?
It's very difficult for me to say what his strategy is, because he's doing little or nothing at the moment except launching the Scuds, which really are more a terror weapon than they are anything else. They're not militarily significant. They're not precise. They can't hit a military target, so he aims them at a city, Tel Aviv, Riyadh, what have you. I read the papers, too. I see that some feel he's holding back for a major offensive that will come on later. That does not seem to make an awful lot of sense, since he's being attrited while he's doing all this waiting. I can't crawl into his head and tell you what his plans are, but it's been said publicly recently that we don't expect any difficulty in maintaining a level of effort against him. We're not going to punch ourselves out.
Sir? You're listing 14 MIAs. You did that yesterday as well. Is that to say you've not heard any official announcement from Iraq about the alleged 3 POWs, no Coast Guards? And what about the pilot that was rescued? Was he listed as an MIA among those 14?
Mr. Williams is going to address that in more detail when I'm finished, because that's not an operational matter. But we tend to carry everybody as an MIA until we have a disposition on them, and I'd have to check specifically on that. Yes, sir.
General, could you bring us up to date on the air-to-air battle? Is there any air-to-air action still going on? And did the Iraqis manage to bring down any U.S. planes in earlier engagements?
There are 0 U.S. aircraft that were lost to an air engagement, to an Iraqi aircraft. We lost no planes in the past day, as I said when I came up here. Iraqi flight activity is low. I can't tell you why they're doing that either. They're electing not to fight. They're moving their airplanes to the north. I saw on TV last night, as I assume you did, where one pilot indicated that they were in the air, but as the U.S. aircraft approached, they went away and then came back after the U.S. aircraft were gone. Whether that represents guidance to the pilots a plan or whether it indicates that the pilots don't want to take on the U.S. flyers, I can't say for sure. Like you, I have my opinion.
Can you tell me what air-to-air missiles we might have used in bringing their planes down?
We don't want to discuss the exact capabilities we have because that helps them.
A question on battle damage assessment. I can understand why you're being slow and why it's slow in getting information to us. But the White House today said that President Bush is frustrated because he hasn't seen any information either. How long does it take for this to come out?
I didn't know that the president was frustrated. I can assure you we're working hard. As I said, the difficulty we've had over the past several days has been bad weather. You can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. You can't look through those very heavy clouds. But I think I used the word assiduously the other day and got some comments on that. We're working very hard to get that done. We think we'll have success soon.
General, this morning CENTCOM said that Navy aircraft had attacked a T-43 mine-laying vessel. Can you tell us, first of all, whether that vessel was confirmed sunk and if it was the only T-43 that the Iraqis have? And secondly, could either of you address in more general terms what sort of Iraqi naval targets are being hit during this air campaign?
Well, the last answer is everyone we can lay our hands on, everyone we can find. The ship that you're talking about, the mine layer, was hit and disabled and was dead in the water. There was some thought from some quarter, I don't know what quarter, that it was in the process of sinking. They have been keeping their maritime capability, which is pretty limited compared to what we can put against it, pretty close to home, and I would guess, and I'll turn it over to the intelligence guy, that it's just a mine layer that's coming out. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. The assessment that we have at this point is that, well, like the aircraft, we're not seeing a significant amount of movement by the Iraqi Navy. In fact, it would almost be a mirror image of what we're seeing with the aircraft. They're trying to avoid us. This one didn't avoid us.
Yes, sir.
General Kelly, Iran has professed neutrality, saying they're not going to let their airspace be used for any of the combatants. Do we have any indication to the contrary?
We don't have any proof, as has been indicated in various media, that the Iraqi Air Force is flying to Iran for safe haven. Do we?
No, sir. And have we obtained any information from those Scuds that have fallen into the water? Are we actively trying to get a hold of those Scud missiles?
I'll have to check on that and get back to you. I just don't know the answer. Yes, sir.
General, do you know what's happened to the Iraqi Adnan aircraft and whether they've played any part in the war at all?
I do not. Do you? No. Take a note on that and we'll try to get you an answer.
General.
Yes,
General.
ma'am.
Could you describe the circumstances surrounding the loss of the Apache helicopter?
It went down. I should know that answer. I don't, Pete. I'll get that right back to you and you can get it out.
General, on the sir, on the Kuwaiti oil fields, what damage might have been done? Could you expand a little bit on your earlier response? You said it was instigated by the Iraqis. Did the fire involve a large number of oil wells, a small number of oil wells, any oil wells, storage facilities? What did you interpret as a vengeful act by the Iraqis to destroy the oil fields, or was there any tactical significance in what they may have done there?
I tried to look into that just before I came down because I thought I'd have some questions on it. I read about it in this morning's briefing, and we don't have any information. We're in the process of getting it. As I say, they're investigating it in theater. That's pretty tactical information anyway, so they'd be the logical ones to do it, and so I don't know.
General, the British Armed Forces briefer this morning said that that many aircraft were able to operate, Iraqi aircraft were able to operate off of most of the Iraqi fields. Can you square that with your recent comments that you virtually have air superiority where you want it?
We have air superiority. I'm not going to get involved in actual numbers. There could be 50 or more Iraqi airfields. They're not operating for very many of them. I will go back to the other point I made, which is that airfields can be repaired fairly quickly and they can be up off one. But regardless of whether they're using the airfields or not, and they're not using very many of them, they're not electing to engage in aerial combat.
General, can you tell us how many are being repaired? You spoke of some being repaired within 24 hours. How many airfields
I said they could be. and it varies. Do you have anything on it?
No, it's a dynamic situation. Of course, it's dependent upon the level of damage that's sustained and then how long it's going to take to get an airfield back up. But it's a target that moves every day and changes.
Well, we can give you a little bit more than that.
20%?
Great penchant for mathematics, and I don't have it broken down mathematically, but we have seen airfields go down and come back up. As a matter of fact, that's been obvious because they've been flying out west. I don't have exact numbers on it, and so I'd be reticent to want to hang a percentage on it right now.
Are there other places where bomb damage is being repaired and thwarting your efforts?
That goes along with the bomb damage assessment, which we don't have complete yet to our satisfaction, but yes, the answer is yes, they are out trying to repair a lot of things, as you would expect. Remember that they still have over 1 million people under arms, and they have capabilities.
Would you try to quantify that for us tomorrow, sir?
Yeah, I'll try and get you something.
General, on the oil fields, if you would. A question for both you and for the captain. First of all, are you concerned that if there is a significant number of sabotage acts committed in the Kuwaiti fields, and if a number of them go up simultaneously, it could pose a real problem for either an amphibious landing or for any kind of effort to go in with ground forces? Captain, the question to you would be, what information do we have on just how many of those fields may have been rigged and how?
You want me to go first?
Please.
Yeah, if they all went and a great pall of smoke hung over it, it could have an effect on operations. If we were electing to go where those oil field fires were occurring, my surmise is we would try to avoid that. It's hypothetical in that it hasn't happened yet. It certainly is possible. It certainly could have an effect. If it did have an effect, that's what war is. He tries something, you try something. We would look for another way to do the job. We're confident we can do that.
Captain, you want
General, very quickly.
Let him finish, please, on the assessment here.
Clearly, our assessment of how many of those oil fields may be in jeopardy to explosions, etc., is something we just can't talk about.
General.
Yes, General. Why are you unable to tell us what kind of weapons we're scoring kills with air-to-air? We only have 3 kinds. That's no secret. Sidewinder, Sparrows, and Phoenix. Why is that a secret?
Yes, but you're butting into a policy there. We have very many more than 3 kinds of weapons that we're using in this war, and we would not like to tell him which ones we're having the greatest success with. You're right. You can figure it out probably fairly easily what air-to-air weapons we're using and having success with. I've just got a policy.
General, that's good.
You've had a clear day today, one good, clear day.
Yes, ma'am.
Clearly, you've gotten some battle damage assessment.
In Iraq, not in Kuwait.
Right, over Iraq.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what has finally been put out to your satisfaction?
What has finally been put out?
Capabilities of his have now been...
Yeah, this is not instant. The reason that I'm happy that we had a clear day today, which is 8 hours ahead of us in Saudi Arabia, is because now they can get out and do that and process it and get it to their own interpreters and get it back to our interpreters. And there's a function of time till you get that completed. I'm hopeful that we'll get some good stuff in a fairly short period of time.
Follow on that, what have you done with your clear day? Have you mounted a major attack on Basra? What sort of air attacks have you carried out?
I think I mentioned in the lead-in. Yeah, I think I mentioned in the lead-in. I don't have the sortie numbers for today, but we, as you know, have been flying roughly 2,000 sorties a day. That's about a surge rate, or that's about a level of effort rate, and I would assume that it's about the same. If you lose a sortie yesterday, that doesn't mean you have it today because you only have the 1 or 2 or 10 or 50 or 100 or 1,200 airplanes.
And have there been major attacks in the Basra area during today, taking advantage of the weather?
If the weather is clear in the Basra area, which of course is right next to Kuwait, and I'm not certain how far down that goes, I can assure you that there are attacks in the Basra area, and I can assure you that there are attacks in the Kuwaiti area.
General, thank you.
Okay, just a couple of other things here.
The Pentagon briefing coming to a close. As we say, the background of all of that are continuing questions about how effective the U.S. airstrikes have been, so a good deal of briefing was taken up with that. News of this afternoon, at least 1 Scud confirmed has hit a working-class neighborhood in Tel Aviv, Israel. There are some wounded. How many we do not know. If anybody has been killed, we do not know. These pictures have been censored by Israeli military censors. They have taken out a good deal of the material that our cameramen have shot. U.S. Patriot ground-to-air defense missiles were put up in the air because of cloud cover, impossible to tell by cameramen and others whether the Patriots hit anything or not. Tom Fenton is in Tel Aviv. Tom? Well, apparently Tom Fenton has gone to check on some information, but...
Dan, they're still pulling people out of the rubble, but so far we have 50 or 60 wounded. Some 20 apartment houses were hit, and that accounts for the large number of casualties. There are more casualties this time than from 2 nights of Scud attacks earlier at the end of last week. The big unanswered question is whether the 2 Patriot missiles that were fired off hit anything. They went off into the clouds. There is some speculation that they hit 2 more incoming Scuds. If that is the case, that will take some of the pressure off in Israel, because the United States is very much concerned to keep Israel out of the war. That was why these Patriots were brought here. Dan?
Pressure building in Israel for Israel to strike back at some time at Iraq. So far, as President Bush has put it, the Israelis have exercised admirable restraint, as President Bush put it once, but that was before this most recent attack. This is the 3rd confirmed Scud attack on Israel, by far the most serious, as you can see from the damage. These are fresh pictures that we have not had on the air before, and you saw some of the casualties. Other developments of the day: oil wells have been set on fire in Kuwait. How many and for what purpose? Unclear. The weather has cleared a bit over Baghdad. It is still cloudy over Kuwait. The weather has prevented making any very accurate assessments thus far of the airstrike damage. Controversy building over how effective the airstrikes have been. More questions being asked, perhaps would be a better way to phrase that. Soviet officials said today that 90% of Allied missions have missed their targets. You can put that in the category of, well, we'll see, but that's what the Soviets say. There was a Scud firing at the big air base in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia today, but a Patriot missile apparently knocked that Scud out of the sky. Those are the developments, and this has been our coverage of this afternoon's Pentagon briefing. Let's take a look now and bring you up to date on what will be upcoming here on your CBS station as we continue to cover the Persian Gulf War. We'll have complete details of all the day's developments on tonight's CBS Evening News. Right after your late local news tonight, there will be America Tonight with Charles Kuralt and Leslie Stahl. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Dan Rather in New York. Stay tuned to this CBS station for all the late war developments.
Showdown in the Gulf has been a CBS News special report.
A reason for them to participate. If it's to simply pound an area that we're currently pounding, then I would suggest it's not. I don't think they have to go to any great lengths to prove how strong they are or what their policy of striking back is. I think under these circumstances, they have to take into account the calculation as to whether or not it's worth running the risk of perhaps fraying this coalition in terms of the kind of damage they could inflict upon Saddam Hussein.
Senator Cohen, you've been in military briefings yourself today. Do you sense that the United States is doing everything it can, that Israel perhaps at least militarily can't contribute to the Scud search?
I don't see how the Israelis at this point could contribute additional effort here. We are doing everything we conceivably can, and you have to take into account the fact that these Scud missiles, these mobile Scud missiles, are roaming around an area about the size of Indiana. And so every time they fire one of these, they then start to move, and the pilots have to go in and search a very wide area. Now, I don't know that additional aircraft in that size of an area are going to make much of a difference. So I don't think the Israelis at this point have any additional intelligence that we don't have. And frankly, I think that we can carry out the job best of all right now. If something else is developed, they have some kind of on-the-ground intelligence which gives them additional information about targets we're not currently hitting. Then I think they have a role to play, obviously.
Senator Cohen, you've been in a military briefing yourself today. Are you learning anything that we're not?
No, I think you pretty much have the information. There was one report that I've heard secondhand that the Soviets have announced that we have been 90% unsuccessful. And that struck me as curious in view of the fact that, number one, the Soviets have a vested interest in putting out information, or in this case, perhaps even misinformation. They supplied most of the weaponry to the Iraqis that either is not performing adequately now or is not being operated in a professional manner. Secondly, I find it curious that they would have more information than we have given the cloud conditions. To my knowledge, they do not have better satellite photography than does the United States, and so in terms of assessing damage itself, I doubt very much whether they're in a better position than the United States to make those kind of assessments.
Okay, Senator Cohen, thank you very much for joining us from Washington. Interestingly enough, one of the best sets of pictures, in fact, one of the only sets of pictures we've seen of Kuwait, both before and after the war, were taken the other day from a Soviet satellite in orbit. We saw one of their onboard cameras take some pictures of the war theater. They may or may not have something on board which gives them a closer look than we have had. Just before we go to the White House, there has been an announcement from President Saddam Hussein's spokesman in Baghdad having to do with prisoners of war, and from it you'll get an indication of just once again how Saddam Hussein continues to try to widen the issue beyond Kuwait. His spokesman has announced that Iraq is ready to study any document submitted regarding the treatment of prisoners of war on the basis of the Geneva Conventions, which the U.S. says Iraq is violating, provided this covers the people of Palestine in the occupied territories. That's all we know about that. Let's go to the White House and talk to ABC's Brit. In fact, actually, before we go to the White House, we have on the phone from Tel Aviv Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu. Deputy Foreign Minister, can you hear me?
I hear you fine, Peter.
You know, sir, I'm sure that everybody in America feels profoundly pained by what the people of Tel Aviv are going through tonight. Would you like to tell us your thoughts?
Well, it's not an easy time, obviously. We've had another missile attack. We have about 60 casualties right now. We don't know exactly their full condition. We will very soon. We know that this was a hit into a heavily populated civilian area by a warhead, a regular warhead, not a chemical warhead. And of course, the people of Israel are bearing under this. They're holding their own. But these are not easy times.
Can I ask you, sir, whether or not you were surprised?
No, we've been expecting additional missile attacks. In fact, we've been saying all along that the threat has not been removed. We're very, very appreciative of the Patriot missiles that have been delivered to us. The American crews are teaching our boys as fast as possible. But we have said also from the start that as much as we appreciate the Patriots, we do not believe that they can solve the problem altogether. They can reduce it, they can mitigate it, but there will have to be other solutions in addition to the ones that the Patriots provide for the elimination of this threat against the people of Israel, the cities of Israel.
I think everybody in America, sir, now concludes that Israel is going to respond to the Iraqis when it sees fit. I'm most interested at the moment as how you think this will, or what impact you think this will have on the Israeli popular mood. Will there be a demand for sort of urgent action, do you think?
Well, I think that there is a feeling on the part of the government that is urgent enough that we have to do all the things that we must do in order to defend the country. But and that's why we said from the start that we reserve the right to act, which we shall exercise. But as you know, in this complex situation, especially in this complex situation, it is very wise to choose the course of action as we are doing,
Foreign Minister?
and not respond reflexively.
I was just going to ask you that I can anticipate the thoughtfulness in the government. I was really questioning whether or not you think that people in the general population will have their blood up and will demand that you do something.
Oh, I'm sure some will. I think on the whole, people are cognizant of the complexity of the situation. They will want, I'm sure, a response, but they trust the government to choose the right one.
Okay, thank you very much. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister, speaking to us not from Tel Aviv but from Jerusalem, just to review that incident where, as I said, we have seen the first casualties of this war. 40 people, maybe 60 people, according to John Donovan in Tel Aviv, having been injured. Some, we're told, seriously, but many lightly in this Iraqi attack on Tel Aviv. Just about 2 hours ago now, it is now 11 o'clock at night there. Just before we leave you, a quick review of what was said at the military briefing today, and then we'll go to the White House. And there were no American aircraft lost today. The weather has improved, which the military briefer, General Kelly, said was good for bomb damage assessment and also good for airstrikes over Kuwait, or over Iraq, though there still tends to be some cloud cover over Kuwait. He said those fires started by the Iraqis in Kuwait, 3 locations, we believe, including one in the neutral zone between Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, where 2 American companies, Getty and Texaco, have a deep interest. He says that those are not affecting military actions, but if they went on and got considerably bigger, that could have an effect on offensive operations, presumably also on defensive operations. He does say the Iraqis have managed to repair some runways, which is a reminder that in an air campaign one has to revisit targets time and again, and the Iraqis, as Americans became so experienced during Vietnam, can simply get out in some cases and repair the damage overnight. Iraqi television, which has been showing the pictures of the prisoners of war, violation of the Geneva Convention, continues to be a priority target, but he